ever feel lost in the political whirlwind? Join me today as I talk to Ashley Moulton about how busy parents can stay informed without drowning in that crazy noise that's always there. Today, we're going to talk about trusted news sources, navigating those tricky conversations, and empowering our kids to think critically about political issues they're surrounded by and how that affects their life. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have an amazing, beautiful, wonderful special guest, Ashley Moulton. And she has been in my book club for what, Ashley? How many years? Like 10?
I feel like it's more like 8.
Ashley Moulton has been one of my good friends for quite a while, and she is a gem. And I have wanted to have her on the show for quite a while, but I had to convince her because she's just so cool and she wasn't quite sure if she was ready to come on. So thank you, Ashley, for being on the show with us today. And I will let you introduce yourself because the bio that you gave me wasn't quite up to par. And I'll let you explain that in just a second. So yeah, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
I do not even remember what I wrote for the bio. That was like 2 months ago, which is about 100 years in mom life. So I don't even know what you're talking about, but I am just a regular mom. I have 4 kids and I stay home with them currently. I did used to teach elementary education. I taught 2nd grade, which was really a fun job. And I just have a passion for history and I don't know, just politics and things that affect our world. I'm just very interested in it. And so even though I'm a mom, I still like to learn about these things.
I love that. And I will remind you what your bio said. I'm just a mom that likes politics and history. I was like, all right, way to be descriptive. I love it. Maybe I should give more of a background for you then, because you're not going to brag at all. And I feel like I need to brag about you. Ashley gives so many incredible insights and information on topics I know very little about. One of them, strangely enough, is true crime. I know nothing about that, but she knows a ton about it. But history, I love history, but most especially politics. And I feel like this is one of those topics that I'm not very comfortable with. And I feel like a lot of people aren't. And Ashley has so many insights and is very well read when it comes to these topics. And she's my go-to for kind of finding out what's going on in the world. I trust her way more than I trust the news. And that's why I wanted you on too. So I feel like I'm not the only one that's floundering when it comes to politics. And you've helped me understand why it's important to care a little bit more. So that's why I'm so excited to pick your brain today. So thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Let's jump right in. I know people want to hear from you. So do you mind if I pick your brain for a minute and ask you some questions?
Sure.
All right. First and foremost, my question for you is, what are some quick and maybe easy ways for parents to keep up with what's going on in politics without feeling completely overwhelmed? Because I know we all do.
Okay, so first and foremost, I think it's important to remember that as a mom, as a parent, your family is your number one priority, and your biggest way to influence the world is by being a good parent. So keeping up with politics, keeping up with the news is important, but it shouldn't come at the expense of your family because it is stressful. The news is stressful. Politics are just innately controversial. There's friction in politics. It is hard to be submerged in that all the time. It's not good for a person. And everybody has different tolerance levels. I feel like my tolerance level is a lot more than most people because I've been surrounded by these things my whole life. My dad was a history teacher. He was constantly listening to the news. So I have a higher threshold where I can handle it, but not everybody has the same. And you need to know yourself and you need to know your own boundaries and you need to set them and stick to them. One thing you should know is when you've had enough politics, like when you start feeling angry all the time, or you feel like your blood pressure's up and your heart rate is speeding and you can't concentrate and it's just noise in your head, that is a sign you maybe need to take a step back. But you can also grow your tolerance level for politics a little bit at a time. So maybe a good idea would be to find a good 15-minute podcast that you could listen to on the regular. And it might take some time to find one that you like, but there's a lot of podcasts out there that are just 15 to 20 minutes that are news-based podcasts. So just know there are political people, there are news outlets out there that are just news-based, and there's some that are opinion-based. Meaning, if you're listening to a podcast, they will mostly just stick to facts and events, whereas another show might give more in-depth analysis, a lot more opinion, a lot more fighting back and forth, and maybe you can only tolerate a small amount of just sticking to the basic fact. And there are podcasts out there that do that. You just have to be aware that every news source has a bias. This is very important. Every news source has a bias, even just the ones that stick to the fact. They might have bias in which stories they feature or which facts they bring forward. Maybe they're leaving certain facts back and pushing other ones forward. So it's super important to keep in mind the bias of whatever news source you are listening to. I also think that just studying history and understanding our government and constitution are really important, and that they will help you when it comes to your voting and your participation in current events. If you understand how our country works, it will help you when you're sorting through the messages you're being given about which ones make sense, which ones work with our system of government, which ones are against it. It's very important to understand our history and our government. And I know there's places that have free classes on the Constitution. For example, Hillsdale College is one that I've been thinking about taking their course. I have not taken it, but it's something I would like to do because you forget things over the years. I've been momming for so long. There's things I've forgotten that I would love to brush up on or study more deeply. And you can just do this online. So I think that's really important, but it might take you a little bit to find news sources that you like and that mesh with you, but they're out there. So keep looking and just set your boundaries and your tolerance level and stick to it.
So I have to ask, which ones do you really trust? I know that it's your opinion, but it helps to know what people listen to, what they like.
Okay, I really enjoy all sides media specifically because this is my philosophy about news and this is theirs as well. There was a time in history where news organizations just claimed their bias. It was like the Republican Gazette or whatever, the Democratic newspaper, the Republican newspaper. And I prefer that actually. I think that you can find people from both sides of the aisle, not that you necessarily agree with everything that they think, but that you trust. But if you know what side they're coming from, then it helps you take what they're saying with a grain of salt. Oh, this person's speaking to this from the left angle. This person's speaking from the right. And all sides media, they have people that work for them on all sides, far left, center right, far, and they work together. So they'll talk about an issue and people from the different sides will all comment on one issue. And that makes so much more sense to me because then you can look at all the different arguments and you can think to yourself, which one of these arguments makes the most sense to me logically? Which person, which side here on this topic is taking the facts and presenting the most logical argument? So it is so important to know what bias your news outlets have. Once you know what bias they have, it just opens up a whole new world because you're a lot less likely to just believe whatever they say or to be manipulated because you understand that everyone has bias, every single person, every single news organization, and you can take that into account. All sides media will look at different media organizations and give them a bias rating, and they have a really nice chart that shows you these companies are center, these are right, these are left, and they change over time. So there's been a lot of times they've said, oh, this one's moved over now, and they do blind bias tests with people and polls to get these ratings. It's just so helpful, and it's so important that you know this so that you're not manipulated because it is so easy for the media to manipulate you. It's so much harder if what they're trying to convince you of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually goes into my next question too. What are some red flags that you can look out for when reading news articles or even following political groups? Because really, none of us want to get sucked into any traps or be manipulated like you talked about.
I made a list of things that I think through when I'm listening to any news channel, any news person. These are things I think about. First of all, do they hide their bias or do they pretend that they don't have any bias? That's a red flag. Are they telling you what they believe is true or are they just telling you what they think is good for their their candidate. When they say something, do you know that is their honest opinion? Or do you think they're just saying what they want you to hear or what they wish was true, basically? Do they seek to understand the other side? Could they have a conversation with somebody from the other side? Another one is, this is a big one right now. Do they have hero worship or any political candidate? Now, I'm not saying they can't support a political candidate. Basically, everyone has a political candidate they support or they would like to win. That's not the problem. The problem is when they hero worship them so much that they can see no wrong. This candidate never says anything wrong. They never lie. And I'm here to tell you, basically, every political candidate lies or at least withholds some of the truth. So if they hero worship a candidate, that is a huge flag not to listen to them. Can they criticize their own side when it is needed? So if you hear them say something like, now I'm voting for this person, but this thing they said, that wasn't really true, or this was exaggerated. Those are good signs because you can still vote for somebody even if you don't agree with everything they say, even if you know that something they said wasn't true, you can still vote for them. It's a good sign though if you can admit it though.
I gotta interject for a second here. When I was going through my master's program, I felt like Ashley was so good at helping me see both sides because I went to a very conservative university first and then a very liberal university. And I hated that, like, I always felt so conflicted. And you always helped me navigate that pretty well. Like, you were able to stand back and see perspectives on both sides, but help explain it in a certain way. So I love that you're able to see those red flags and recognize it and break it down in a way that we can understand. And funny enough, I didn't even think about this when I wanted you on the show because politics is just something you wouldn't think that normally would apply to mental health and wellness. But especially during presidential elections, I feel like the world gets nuts. So I'm so glad that you're speaking to this right now. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that. I don't know if I struck something within you, but with all the stuff that's going on right now, how are you navigating it without being super frustrated and getting pulled in too much or just like throwing your hands up in the air?
You know what's funny is I actually think that election years are a good time to take a step back from politics because when they get the most sensationalized, it's when they take real problems that are really happening, but they bombard you with them and they make you think that it's the end of the world and they try to manipulate your mind. Every election cycle, the bad things that are going on are going to be amplified 10 times more. And one political cycle, several times back, I was so into every little thing that was happening with the election that after the election, I was just drained. I was just so over it. And I probably went 2 years without listening to the news, 2 straight years, which is just crazy for me because it is a hobby of mine. So I think an election year is where you step back, you rely on your principles, you rely on what you know to be true. You learn about the candidates, of course, but you go back to which candidate do I think will better reflect my principles? And then you try to drown out all the other noise because in the end, in our country, one of the 2 candidates is going to win, basically. And you're not going to like everything about either of them. Maybe you don't like anything about either of them. I don't know. But generally speaking, your principles will be reflected better in one or the other. And if you can decide that kind of early and then tune out the noise, sometimes that's the best thing to do during a political cycle. One of my other red flags was, does the person you're listening to online have principles? Do they have a philosophy that they stick to and that they judge the world by? Or are they just in it for the money or the popularity? Do they just blow with the political wind? Or are they so captured by an ideology that they won't open their mind to anything else? If they have principles that they judge things by, that's a good sign.
I finally just watched Hamilton, and this is the guy that didn't stand for anything. I forgot his name. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've never watched. It's crazy.
Yeah, about the founding fathers. I'm surprised you haven't watched it.
No.
There's one that like, totally didn't stand for anything, just a fence sitter, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what you're saying. Make sure they're standing for something and they're not just going wherever they're going to get the vote, right?
Yeah. You can disagree with a person's stance on something, but if they're coming at it from, this is a principle I believe in and this is the way I look at it, you can respect a person's argument even if you don't agree with it, if they're standing on an underlying principle.
Absolutely. How do you handle conversations with friends or family who see things differently, like really wanting to stay open-minded, but also stand your ground? I feel like this one is really hard for me because my family's all over the board when it comes to political viewpoints. Like it's a sticky subject, and we're also coming up on the holidays, and this inevitably comes up, right?
Yes, it does. Okay. So, what I would say is there are a couple questions you need to keep in mind. And the first question is, what is the purpose of this discussion? Are you just trying to learn and understand each other? Are you in a book club and like to discuss controversial topics and get into the nuances of things? Or are you trying to convince this person? Is this a debate? Is this a family member you love? Or is this a group of people at a school board meeting? Because there are times to debate and to go hard. And in those conversations, your purpose is convince the people at this meeting that I am correct about this. There are times for that. And there are times for just, hey, we're just batting around this nuanced topic and I want to learn your thoughts and you want to learn mine. But you need to know your purpose, because if you're with a family member and really it should be just a batting back and forth of ideas, but you're acting like you got to agree with me, you're probably not going in with the right purpose for that discussion. So you need to be clear in your head about the purpose of the discussion. And you're going to be different depending on what situation you're in and who you're talking to. And you might go harder on an audience at a city council meeting than you would a friend that you want to keep, because you don't necessarily want to shove your beliefs down everyone's throat, but you do want to express them.
That's such a simple thing, but I hadn't really thought about it in that way. Like, especially in a family setting, which those are the ones I'm thinking about the most, that I feel like it's more appropriate to seek to understand or connect rather than convince or debate. Like, it's just not the place for it. But just a simple kind of self-check thing that you could do. What about some small things that we can do to support some causes that we actually care about? Even as a parent, you're super busy and overwhelmed oftentimes. Like, when I think about politics, before I started talking to you, Ashley, I was like, oh, that sounds like so much work. Not anything I would want to do. And yet, talking to you, you always inspire me. So maybe work your magic, do some of that inspirational stuff that you do.
Okay, I'll try. But honestly, you have the most influence over your immediate family and your local area. So if you want to make a difference, pay attention to what's going on in your local area and in your children's schools. That's so important. And honestly, I think it's harder to get local news, because when we were growing up, news was in the newspaper, news was on the TV, and now everything's online. And I feel like the national media caught on to that quicker, but I do think local news stations and stuff, they're catching on. It's getting easier to find an app for your area, for example. So look on your phone, see if your local area has an app or a website that you can follow. Follow what's going on in the schools, follow what's going on in the town near you, because those are the ones you have the most direct influence over. Go to the school board meetings if you know something controversial is happening. Talk to your kids and know what they're being taught in the schools. These are things that are very important and that you can make a big difference in if you show up and speak out. So that'd be the easiest way. National issues are a lot harder. It's a lot harder for us to have influence over those. But just remember, you teaching your kids what you believe in is making a difference in the long run. It does over time. When we have an educated populace coming up, when we educate our kids, it changes the future of the country. So just always keep that in mind. That's your number one priority.
That's why I want you to be like a professor of politics or run for office, because I think you'd be so good at it. And then maybe I feel less bad about not doing it because you're running the show, but I know that's not what we're supposed to do. I love that though. Those are super simple things that we can do that don't feel so overwhelming. How do we know if there's some local issues we should be paying attention to right now? Like, how can we know that we're not missing out on things that really matter?
The truth is, you will miss things. You will miss things. You can't pay attention to everything that's happening at all times. You just can't. And you can't make every single issue your pet issue. It's impossible. But if you are keeping your ears open, if you're paying attention to your kids and what they're learning, if you're keeping up on your local area, you'll hear things that are going on. I know there's a lot of talk about book banning right now. This is just an example. People are getting very worked up about book banning, and people have very strong opinions about whether you should ban books or not. And when I see people fighting back and forth about this, one thing I noticed is that very few of these people actually go and look at the book that are being argued about. That is a huge thing. You have to do a little digging. How do you know if you're for the book banning side or the non-book banning side if you didn't go and actually look at the books that are being contested? You need to do that so that you will know which side you fall on. Be at peace that you cannot be aware of every situation at all time, but when there comes one that you are very passionate about, be ready to fight for it.
I feel like there's so many different directions we could go, so many things that you could teach us. So I'm glad we're getting some of these answers because I feel like they're these bite-sized things that will really help. You keep talking about get involved in the schools or your local communities. And there's so many things that I'm finding that I care more about as my kids get older too, and they give my kid more things that I don't want them to. Suddenly I'm caring a lot more about those things. But my last question for you today is how can we help our kids think critically about what they see and hear in the news? Like, I really want them to be smart consumers of information, but I don't even really know how to do that well. So what do we do?
I think that you start with yourself. You make sure that you are a good consumer of news and that you know your own stuff and that you can spot bias. Back to that All Sides Media that we talked about, they give you ways to spot bias. That's another thing that their website does. So you can spot bias in headlines. You can spot bias in the facts that are presented or held back. So get right with yourself. And then it is so much easier to teach your kids because you can't teach your kids something that you don't know yourself. When you are wisely consuming news, it is so much easier to help your kids. For example, anytime you hear something very sensational in the news, this candidate said this crazy, horrible thing, immediately question it. Be a skeptic and teach your kids to be a skeptic. There's a very good chance that what this person said was taken out of context. And go and find the source and listen to the whole clip, the whole video, and then decide. Sometimes maybe it's true. Lots of times it's not true. Focus on principles. Teach your kids principles. Teach your kids history, the history of our nation. Make sure they understand where our country came from, where our Constitution came from, how it's set up. That will help them in the long run to be able to judge going forward where they stand on a lot of issues. If they have principles in their heart and they understand our history, they will have a much stronger foundation of judging the individual problems and topics that get thrown their way over time.
Yeah,
that are going on.
I think you just summarized that really well because I was thinking about the things that stood out to me that you were talking about today. And it was going back and studying the Constitution. I know it's silly, but when I was watching a Hamilton, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much stuff I don't remember about the founding fathers. I feel like I have to go brush up on all these things and read about this part of history. And when I was taking those classes, I actually really loved it, learning about why they built the Constitution that way and what they were really wanting to put in there and why and what they fought back and forth on. Like, I love that stuff. So doing that, but I love how you tie it back to this. And this is what I do in the podcast all the time of relying on principles and your values, like living congruently with your values and having in that philosophy, not just for yourself, but the people that you are supporting, you're backing up, and then be a skeptic and research, be informed. Like everything you're talking about is being proactive. It's not being like a passive listener and consumer of media, but be wise, be careful. It goes back to even just human interaction, right? If there's a lot of drama around you, you don't just jump in and perpetuate it, but you want to be wise and careful about it. I love things that you share. Would you give us any last advice when it comes to politics in general or all of the things that are coming or currently that we're facing with the elections going on that would be a nice ending to help us know where to go or how to get through this?
Yes. This is just going back to when you're talking to other people. We all have different beliefs about political topic, but I think we all need areas of agreement. We all love our country. I guess I can't say everyone loves their country, but most people in our nation love our country and want what's best for it. And we need water cooler areas in our lives, which water cooler areas are things where we can go, places we can go where we forget about all of the areas we disagree, all the things we don't see eye to eye on, and remember our common humanity. Remember, hey, you like this movie? I like this movie. You like football? I like football. You like sports? I like sports. You love your country? I love our country. It's like when you're talking to people, you got to remember that it doesn't always have to be the center of everything. You need these moments where you remember, hey, this is just another guy down the street. We both love football. And those places and those moments help to keep the tension down when you do have to discuss the hard things. Just remember that everything's not about politics. Sometimes it needs to be left out. Sometimes we just need to remember the guy down the street is just another guy that you enjoy being around and that just thinks differently than you about a few things. And that's okay. We can accept that about each other and move on and still treat each other with kindness and agree to disagree.
It goes back to those same principles of being open-minded, having that charity and celebrating those commonalities like you're talking about, instead of focusing on that us versus them, like that contentious spirit that can reside side. Like, for example, during COVID, I felt that tension all the time because there's so much animosity or differing opinions about the subject. But then I think about different faith, when there's interfaith things and they come together and they just celebrate the commonalities. There's nothing that I love more than that. And focusing on that, like, I would love politics so much more if there was a little bit more of celebration of the commonalities. So I think that is a wonderful place to leave it. I love that you wrapped it up with that. And the insight and the wisdom that you offer is, as always, wonderful. So thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on and speaking into something that I definitely cannot speak as eloquently on. So I appreciate you being here and sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Kendra.
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you, no matter what your house or your hair looks like. I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.